Welcome back to the fifth episode of my home-based business YouTube podcast. I'll call it a video podcast, but basically you can watch it on YouTube or you can listen to it while YouTube is running. It's a YouTube podcast. But we've been going over this book that I wrote in 2010. This is the fifth chapter, and I believe it's the final chapter in the book, and then we'll move on to other things. But I was laughing when I read this because it's the same stuff that I'm saying today. None of the advice in this book is old. This is all basic common sense, and that's what is called not so common sense, because a lot of people don't seem to think that this is normal. I don't know. I mean, this stuff is so obvious to me, but I guess not to everyone. All right, so today we're talking about the concept of being judged by the company that you keep. Now, in any business, you need to do networking, right? You need to go out and meet other businesses. And especially when I wrote this book, I was selling locally and I was working with local customers, and you have to kind of be interviewed by brides all the time. And it's like one long blind date and you're trying to sell your services. It's terrible. But, online it's not quite as active like that as far as networking goes. But you really do need to kind of get your feet wet and jump into groups and that kind of thing. And be careful who you learn from and be careful who you associate with. It's really important. So let me just go through this bit by bit, but I have so many stories. I have so many stories for this episode. It's just not even funny. So because, I've like I said, I've been doing this since 1999. So that's 24 years. It's going to be almost 25 years I've had a home-based business. And you have to work with a lot of people. And sometimes you work with people and then you see what they're doing behind the scenes and you're like, I don't really want to work with you anymore. Okay, so you need to network. You need to get personal and business connections. And it is important, and especially if you're a local business, you need to get out there and meet people. Social media has made it a lot easier because we don't have to worry about doing it in person all the time. And a lot of times you can have a good social media presence, but never really go out into the community and meet people. And it's fabulous for introverts. But there will be times when you have to go out and talk to people. Some people really enjoy that. Some people really don't. But it is a necessary evil if you do have a business. So the first thing to understand is that you can get something from every interaction. So even if it turns out that you don't think this person can help you, or you don't think that you got much from this business interaction, you probably got something, and that's worth something, even if it was a negative experience that you can learn from, and you know what not to do next time. That's important. Knowing what not to do is sometimes just as important as knowing what to do. So don't ever think that networking is useless unless you are the one like I used to be, who goes to the networking meeting and just kind of sits in the corner and tries not to talk to anybody. That's not good, except that you can usually find someone to sit in the corner with you, and then that works out because then you can be friends with them and you can refer business to each other. But you want to go out and make an effort to meet people because you don't know who's going to be able to refer business to you, and that's really the whole point of networking. However, not every networking opportunity, and I'm using air quotes here if you're just listening, not every networking opportunity is worth your time. And I mentioned in this book that I went to a local cake club. It was presented to me like, hey, we get together and talk about cake decorating and we share tips and that kind of thing. And I thought, hey, that's great. So I went, and it was basically at this woman's house, and she was holding court, and everybody sat and listened to her talk. And it was a lot of gossip, and there wasn't a whole lot of cake talk at all. And, at one point somebody showed me a picture and said, look at this one I made. And somebody got the picture off the internet, and it was a cake that I had designed. All right. So she copied my design, didn't know it because someone brought her the picture from the internet. And, I'm like, okay, what am I getting out of this? I knew more about cake decorating than anybody at that place, and no one else was a business owner. And so they weren't coming at it from the same direction that I was. So that was not a good use of my time, and I stopped going to that cake club. So that's just how that went. But there were networking meetings where other wedding vendors went. There was a bridal association I was president of for a while, and that was very worthwhile going to those meetings because you got to know other vendors in town, and they could refer business to you because you developed a personal relationship with them that would then lead to business relationships. So you have to pay attention to which, like, where should you be spending your time in networking? And for the online world, this kind of translates to Facebook groups, doesn't it? Doesn't this kind of translate to Facebook groups? Because you're like, oh, I'm in a bunch of Facebook groups. And think about where you spend your time online. Sometimes spending your time online in specific groups is a good use of your time. And sometimes it's just really a horrific waste of your time, and you would be better off going out to find, a bunch of dogs to shave instead of being in that group. So make sure that when you're choosing where to spend your time, it's a place that is going to benefit you, and it's not some place that you're just going to waste your time and you feel like you've done something because you've been in the group, but it really is not really teaching you anything, and it's not benefiting you in any way. So just be aware of that. Don't jump into that kind of thing. So don't jump into anything if somebody says, hey, let's work together. This is the next section. All right. One thing that I find is that people, especially when you're first starting out, you're very excited when someone wants to work with you. You're very excited when someone suggests, hey, let's do a collaboration. You're like, yay, let's do it. But sometimes it's not the best fit because you have different expectations, or in the case of social media collaborations, somebody has a lot more followers than the other person. And there are ways that you can trade that kind of thing off. For example, if you want to do a collaboration with someone who doesn't have that many or has a lot more followers than you and you don't have that many, maybe you could do all the work and they could do all the promotion, because that's going to benefit you in the long run. And it's just something that they can offer their follower, their fan base. But a lot of people will not want to collaborate with people unless they kind of have an even split, right? Like if you have about the same number of followers that I do, but there's not exactly an overlap, like it's not exactly the same group, because there's no point in doing that. But if you want to do collaborations, you have to understand, why are you doing the collaboration? What are each of you going to get out of doing the collaboration? And don't just jump into doing a collaboration because someone suggests it. That's not a good idea. And you really have to understand exactly what each person is going to be putting into it, because you might get ripped off. All right. And the example that I gave in this book is when our poor little victim, Lucy, decides to, go and do some shop work and, ask people, will you sell my stuff in your shop? And this woman is like, yeah. And then she messes around and puts her own products in the gift baskets and doesn't share the profits, So you have to be really careful. And is the person who is suggesting that you work together, are they reputable? Do they have a good background? Do they have a solid business where people trust them? And I mentioned a photographer. Photographers seem to have lots of weird experiences. I think they see everything. There was a photographer I used to work with, and he was a really nice guy. So I felt really bad for him when I saw that he had loaned this crazy girl. There was a girl in town. I say girl because she was about, in her early 20s, who decided that she was a wedding cake designer. And she put up a website, but she also had a bunch of social media up that had her doing all kinds of very questionable activities that if I was the mother of the bride and I was researching her, I would easily find it and see her doing, it just was stuff you wouldn't want your business associated with. So she had a kind of a weird reputation, and she changed from cakes to cupcakes and then back. And then she was suddenly a wedding dress shop owner. It was bizarre. So she got this photographer to loan her a whole bunch, really big framed photos for her new wedding boutique. And I'm not sure who was, I think her father was financing this, is the story that I heard. And he was basically paying for her to try to buy her a career somewhere because she had no skills. I don't know. But she opened this shop. She had a storefront, and she got these photos and she hung them up in her boutique. And then suddenly the boutique closed, and he never heard from her again, and he never got his pictures back. All right. So I saw, I think on his social media, that he was like posting, oh, we're setting up, we're staging. And I was like, oh my God. Okay. And I thought at the time, should I call him? And should I tell him to be careful? Because I knew about this girl's reputation, and apparently he didn't. but I thought, I'll just mind my own business. I'm not involved in any of this. What is the expression? Not my circus, not my monkeys, right? So I said, I won't say anything. And I ran into him about a month after this at the supermarket. And I was like, hey, and I said, yeah, I'm sorry about that. And he's like, yeah, I didn't get my pictures back. I don't know where she is. And I said, well, I was thinking about calling you because I knew that there was something fishy with her, like I knew that she had this reputation. And he's like, oh, I really wish that you had. So I felt bad about it. But, the fact is that you have to look, you have to be careful, and you have to see if the people that you want to work with are people that other people want to work with. Because see what happens when I see him working with her, I'm like, oh, is he lowering his standards now? Should I refer people to him? Because reputation, as Cheap Trick says, reputation is a fragile thing. Okay. And if you know what song that is, posted in the comments. Anyway, reputation is a fragile thing, and you have to be very careful because you're associated with the people who you work with, and their reputation is going to leak out onto you if you're not careful. And I think this guy was lucky that she suddenly closed this boutique and their business relationship was over faster than it started because he escaped. Like, he was not dragged down with her, maybe selling dresses that she didn't deliver. I don't know, any of that. I don't think that she sold anything. I think she had a grand opening and then a grand closing within a couple of weeks. But it's better to, I was glad for him that he got away from that. All right. So we'll just say that. All right. Now, you might then think, okay, well, that didn't work out. Like if you try something and it just doesn't work out the way you want it to, you feel like you gotten taken advantage of, someone stole your pictures or whatever. Don't just say, I'm never going to work with anyone. You just need to watch for the red flags. And there are a lot of red flags that a lot of people throw out. All right. And sometimes you don't see them, but sometimes you do, but you're willing to kind of pass them by. And this has happened to me. I've done this before. I'm sure that some people know probably who I'm talking about, but most people probably will not. And there are actually enough people that I can kind of meld together into one profile that it's not really one person. It's kind of a combination of many people that I've worked with in the past, where you think someone is, they're honest. You think they're honest. Not so much. You think that they have a good reputation. Not so much. And then when you start comparing notes with other people, you're like, wait a minute. Oh, and that reminds me of the story. I'll tell you the story I'll tell you the story at the end. I have so many stories. I'll tell you the story at the end about reputation, okay? And how things can turn on a dime, and you have to be very careful. So the hardest thing when you're first getting started is to understand what the limits are and how much you can ask people. And like me saying, should I tell this guy? Should I say something? I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to say something in case she had reformed herself and was actually being honest now. Apparently that was not the case. But you have to be very careful about publicly talking about other people. And there was a very well-known wedding cake decorator. Hold on. And she kind of lost it on her Facebook page at one point. And she was having a feud with another very well-known cake decorator. And they were going back and forth on their page and just accusing each other of things. And we were just sitting there with the popcorn. It's like, this is bizarre, but it's highly entertaining. But it didn't do either of their reputations any good. And when just keep it in private. Like, don't go out and talk about people. And I try not to talk about people. There comes a point where you have to explain some things. But I keep so many details to myself of experiences that I've had with other professionals that if I ever wrote a book, I would just burn it all to the ground. I would let it rip. But you need to be very careful about what you say about other businesses, even if you know that they're whatever. And especially when brides or customers ask you, what do you think about this one? Never tell them. Never tell them. And I mean, I had an employee once when I worked in retail. I worked at a department store and I was the manager. This kid was, well, first of all, like he was harassing the female workers. And I had to like step in and tell him, cut it out multiple times. And then he would just not show up to work. And he did a bunch of other stuff. I eventually had to fire him. Okay. And then he puts me down as a reference for his next job. Are you stupid? And I think the answer was yes. Okay. So the problem with that is that if someone calls you for a reference, you can't say anything negative about the person because they can sue you for slander or whatever, right? You have to be really careful. Now, this happened to be, the person that called me happened to be someone who I used to work with at the same department store. So I knew her, and she called and said, this guy is asking for a job. And I was like, you have got to be kidding me. And I basically told her probably the truth, but you have to be really careful when you talk about other businesses in general, because you don't know who's listening, right? So just be really careful, but keep all this information in your head and just be really careful who you work with. Now I don't even know how I got started on that, but the red flags. Yeah. Pay attention to red flags. If you see things that you think are shady, it probably is. And there was a person that I was working with at one point, and this was all around the same time when I decided to take Etsy really seriously. I decided that I had my Etsy shop, but I was also selling cakes at the same time. So for a while I was doing wedding cakes full time and Etsy pretty much full time. And it's like something has to give. So I started to phase the cakes out because that was more effort. Like it was more one-on-one talking to customers. Like I said, it's like one long blind date when you're being interviewed and that kind of thing. And it was physical. It was very physical. Making wedding cakes is a very physical thing. And my back was broken. I mean, I was in pain most of the weekend. It was not good. So I said, okay, the wedding cakes, I'm going to phase them out. I'm just going to be on Etsy. So I need to take this seriously. And so I started looking around at other businesses to force myself to learn e-commerce because I knew retail, but e-commerce was new to take it seriously. Like I knew enough about it, but like I said, if you want to have a full-time job, you need to take it seriously. So I found a few people, I took a bunch of courses, and in the process of doing that, there were like 3 or 4 people who I contacted and was working with them to get like basically authority for my business online. And I'm still working with some of them, but some of them not so much, because when you start working with people and you see what their work ethic is and you see what kinds of things they do, it's not as great as you might think. And like there are some people like Marmalade. I think at that point I contacted Marmalade and said, can I be on your podcast? Because they had a podcast back then. And they're like, yeah, because people who have podcasts are always looking for guests. So I went on their podcast and I wrote an article for their blog and that kind of thing. And right around the same time, I wrote a couple of articles for other websites and that kind of thing. And it was very interesting to see how different businesses and how different business owners handled situations and the kinds of things that they did to other businesses. So there are some businesses that I was working with at that point that I was like, I have to remove myself from this whole situation because I don't want to be involved with them when they get caught. Basically, and then others were just shady. And I was like, I don't want to be in on that. So you have to be really careful. And the reputation, like I said, the reputation of one business will leak out onto you if you hitch yourself to that wagon. So just watch it. Just be careful. And if you see red flags, don't ignore them. You need to trust your gut. You need to trust these things when you see them, because anybody who's looking at it from outside is thinking, what are they doing? I'm looking at this photographer thinking, what is he thinking? And he can't know. But he had to have seen some red flags along the way. He had to have seen something that made him think, maybe this girl isn't really all that serious about opening a boutique. But you tend to be you just want to participate. You want to have your photos up. You want to have somebody, post your article or whatever. But if there are red flags, then pay attention to them, because it does affect you indirectly when you end up on Facebook in or you end up in a Twitter war with someone, right? It's just nuts. Because that is not a good thing for your business. It's not a good look. It's not a good look for anyone. So if someone starts something with you, and this is actually a section in here, what if someone starts something with you? Just ignore it. I know it's irritating, but don't go back and forth in public, because if you ignore it, they will, or you can send them a cease and desist. That's effective too. A lot of times legal action, a cease and desist from an attorney will make people shut their gob. They will just shut up, right? But just be careful. Don't get involved with people online like that in a bicker thing. It doesn't work out well for anyone. All right. And I think that we've all seen people on social media with the pitchforks and the lighted torches. And they're like, oh, we're going to go get this person. It's like, just stop. Just don't participate in that. There was, for a while, there was a group on Facebook called Stop the Cake Thief, right? And it was basically people who had stolen cake pictures from websites and had put them on their own websites. And people would let them know, and like, we found this picture on this website and it belongs to this person. And people still do that. Sometimes I'll see posts on Etsy. This person took my photo. This website is full of stolen photos. There's not a whole lot you can do, because a lot of these people just don't care. At this point, they just don't care. But there was this Facebook group called Stop the Cake Thief, and people would go nuts. I mean, cake decorators are insane. And if you're a cake decorator, you know what I'm talking about, where someone will say, she took my picture, and everybody rushes over there to her business page and starts posting, how dare you, And, meanwhile, the people that did that probably have tons of Mickey Mouse cakes on their own websites, but, that's okay to steal. I don't know. Just don't participate. If you see that kind of mob mentality, just stay out of it. All right. Now, watch out whose advice you take. Can I hold this up? Can you see that? Watch out whose advice you take. I wrote this in 2010. Okay. Do I even need to go into this? Do I even need to explain this? Just watch out whose advice you take. Okay. Consider the source. It's SpaghettiO juice information. There are so many examples I could give of this. It's not even worth starting. Okay. Watch out whose advice you take. Just be careful. All right. Now, let me tell the story of reputation is a fragile thing, and how quickly people can start comparing notes and realize that you are a liar. All right. I went to a wedding once, and this was a wedding of, it was like a friend group, like it was a group of friends, and we all known each other. And I will call this guy Steve. Okay. Steve had been telling us for years really funny stories about when he was a bartender, and he was in college. He was a bartender in college, and he would do all this, all the cocktail stuff, would tossing the bottles around and stuff. And he had all these really, really funny stories about things that they would do and things he did in college. And we thought he was great. So it was his wedding. So we went to Steve's wedding. And we're all sitting around after the wedding with his college friends. And we were like the post-college friends. We all worked with this guy. And so we're all sitting around with his college friends who knew him back when he was a bartender. So his college friends said, oh, we're so glad we get to meet you guys, because he tells us about all the cool stuff that you do together. And we're like, oh, like what? And they started talking about the stuff that we had never done. And we were all very confused. It's like, wait, what did he say that we do? And they had basically heard things that we did, but in a highly exaggerated way. And then some things were just straight up lies. They were just made up. So we're going, that didn't really happen. And we're not sure why he told you that. But we're glad to meet you, because he's told us all the cool stuff that you guys did in college, like when he was a bartender. And they're like, he was never a bartender. And what happened is that after, we started comparing notes, And he basically had been lying to both sets of friends about all the cool stuff that he did with the other set of friends and just making stuff up. And no, he was not a bartender. He was a barback, which means he's the guy that brings the empty kegs back into the storage room and he gets a fresh one and brings it out. He was the janitor. He was the grunt worker. He was not a bartender. He was not standing at the bar doing cool Tom Cruise spins with the bottles. No, never. And he didn't do any of the, I don't even remember what he told his other friends that he was doing with us, but none of it was as cool as he was describing. So by the end of this, we all hated Steve, and we were at his wedding actively hating him because he's a liar. And I think it was ridiculous. So you need to be careful about what lies that you tell, because then you have to keep your story straight. And if you ever bring the people that you've been lying to together, they're going to figure it out. And this actually, there are enough, I want to say that there are enough people now that I know of who kind of do the same thing. Like I know a lot about a lot of people in business who sell things to Etsy sellers who I never want to work with because I know too much about them. So just be really careful. And reputation is a fragile thing. It doesn't take long for people to change their opinion of you. It doesn't take long for people to change their opinion of your business, because really you are your business. And this is the problem when you're a home-based business, is it you or is it your business? Do I say we on my about page or do I say I? It's a very gray area, but you need to be very careful with what you do and with who you hang out with, because you are known by the company that you keep. Leave me any questions and I will talk to you later.